For the sushi tutorial, you need white, you'll need a darker green, a lighter green, in a small amount, red, and olive green. First, we're going to start with the white, and I'm just going to roll this out into a single long coil of clay. So it's okay if it's a little bit off white, it's okay if it's a little bit uneven. You're going to be cutting it into super small pieces anyways and mashing it together at the end, so it's all right if it's a little imperfect. But you want to get this super, super thin. Like, think about the size of a grain of rice regularly. And that's about how thin you want it to be as you get started. If you can go even thinner, that can make a really cool effect at the end, but I also know that it's pretty tricky to get it too thin, and then it starts to break. So we'll just put that off to the side for now, and then we'll go with our little green bit, the bright one, and you kind of want it to look like a sprinkle. It should be about 1 centimeter long, if even. And then we're going with the darker green, again rolling it out so it's about the size of a sprinkle, maybe about 1 centimeter long or so. You'll be trimming any extra parts later, so it's alright if they're not quite the same. The next piece is going to be the tuna, which is going to need the red and a tiny, tiny chunk of the white. So you can just break off a chunk from the end, since I didn't tell you to save a piece earlier. Roll it back up, and then flatten it into a little square. Right now I'm trying to pinch the corners to give it a little bit more of a square shape. Again, it's okay if it's not perfect, but it'll be something that'll be helpful if it's a little bit closer to square to start with. And again, we'll put it off to the side. We're going to turn our red into a little cube, so I'm trying to flatten out the sides here. Whatever technique you find to make a cube is perfectly fine. I started off tapping it on the table trying to flatten it, and then I remembered that I have a really good technique of pinching it between two sets of pairs of fingers, and that works really well. Not sure why I didn't do that to start with, but oh well. Then you're going to place your little square of white on top, and you're going to grab your little extra sheet of shrink film that works super well as a polymer clay knife, and you're going to cut that cube with a little white on top in half. So once you've done that, you're then going to stack those two halves together and kind of mush it down. Kind of mush it back together. This is going to give it that marbled, fatty look, because you know that makes the tastiest sushi. I'm debating whether or not I want to cut any sides off, and I'm realizing that it'll work much better if I cut it in half, widthwise, because I want to make it back into a little bit of a cube. This way I could stack it back together, cube it back up. And this is one of those things where if some of the sides aren't as pretty as the others, it doesn't really matter, because you're going to be stacking other things around it, and then you can always cut it down again later. So I'm trying to make it a little bit less cubical, a little more rectangular, because we're going to be stacking each of these things around it. So at this point, we're taking our little sushi toppings. I think that's probably some avocado, maybe some cucumber. Trimming it down so they're the same length. Stacking them together. So I'm going to be stacking these so that they're all pointing upright. In this case, I'm laying it on its side just so it's a little bit easier. And now I'm going through and laying my quote-unquote rice on top of my fillings, making sure that the pieces are tucked together. Chopping it down a little bit at a time. If you need to go back in and fill any empty spots later, hopefully you have some white left over to do so. And I'm just going to go all the way around those fillings. Pressing in on it every so often to make sure that it's all joined together. A little sneak preview of what the next part's going to look like. So as I'm stacking these and wrapping these around, you can kind of see the importance of having a really consistent coil or that long skinny snake of clay. It'll make stacking it and wrapping it easier, but then it's also just more effective for the end effect. Yeah? Almost all the way around.
Why doesn't this stationary camera move when I try to use the remote?
Now at this point I realized I did not have quite enough white clay, and that was my bad.
It doesn't have motors. You can move that like
Mashing it back down. You can tell I'd been touching the red because that piece looks a little pink. So I had to grab a little bit more white clay, rolled it into my little coil again. Sorry if you don't like videos that don't speed up through these parts, but I want to show you how like realistic the time frame is for doing these things. Because sometimes when you see those sped up videos, you're like, is this taking me too long? Is this not taking me long enough? Like, is this right? So with this in mind, about 10 minutes is what it took me. So if it takes you 15, you're probably all right. If it takes you 5, you might be rushing, but whatever works. So at this point, I've got it all wrapped around. Now I need to make my nori wrap, or the seaweed wrap, and this is using the olive green. Now to make the olive green, I mixed the blue, the yellow, quite a good amount of black, and even a little bit of white and pink, just to give it a little bit more of a brown kind of color, and not such a vibrant green. So at this point, I'm cutting it down, trying to keep it kind of a consistent width, because at the end I want it to be about 1 centimeter wide, but I need it to be long enough to wrap around that entire sushi piece. So there I'm cutting off the extras on the side, rolling it out. Now you'll probably notice that I'm using a Sharpie to roll this out. You guys should have your little plastic rolling pin, and I completely forgot to grab one when I went in and grabbed my clay. So I'm just making something else work. So something similar for you to think of. If you can't find your plastic rolling pin, you can use a Sharpie or one of your Crayola markers or anything else that's small and round and you don't mind getting a little messy. So I keep cutting off the extras on the edge and adding it to the end, because again, I need this to be long enough to wrap all the way around. And this can get super thin. So at this point, I have made it so it's about the width that I want it to be in the end. Wrapping it around and over. Look at that, perfect. I didn't even measure that, that was just eyeballing it. And you can already kind of see that little sushi dealio looking thing. So I'm gonna clean off my edge of my little cutter piece here. And I'm just cutting straight down, cleaning up the edge so it's nice and pretty to look at. Ta-da! The big reveal. And then we've got the other side to clean up as well. Make sure you hold it straight. If you need to do a little bit of rocking back and forth, that's okay, but if you do too much, it might rip your piece apart. You don't want that. So there we go, it's all good. Now at this point, it's thick enough that I'm gonna cut it in half again so I can have a matching pair of earrings. Now, I accidentally cut it at kind of an angle, so the bottom got a little bit thicker on one side and thinner on the other. And I kind of had to go back and redo it, but at this point, you can put your screw eye pieces in at the top or on the sides. You can have a matching pair of earrings, you can have a friendship set, whatever you like, you're good to go.